Welcome back to CUE Live. I'm Chris Walsh for the CUE Communications Committee here in Palm Springs, CUE 2017, and I'm joined by Taylor Mawley, who's a teacher, poet, and father, and new father again, second time.
Relatively new father, first time around, possibly second one on the way.
Possibly? You're not sure about that?
I'm not sure. I'm free to talk about it. Yes.
You're reserving judgment. Well, we're excited to have you here. There was a great reception, I think, for your opening keynote, setting the tone for the conference. So congratulations.
Thank you. I had a wonderful time. It was apparently CUE has got over 6,000 people this year.
I think it might even be higher, but I don't want to be the guy who says what the number is.
And I was telling everybody I'm going to be speaking to a crowd of 6,000 people. It wasn't that big. It wasn't that big. It was, 1,500 last night.
Yeah, but we have at least 5 more watching here. 1,505.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all good. So a lot of people might know some of your work from some of the videos online. And certainly that's the first time I saw you with the What Teachers Do video. Is that what we called it? No.
What Teachers Make.
What Teachers Make, sorry. Great video, obviously very inspiring. I know got a lot of people very excited over the years. But tell us a little bit more about what your background is ahead of that video. And I'm curious to know how things changed for you after that came out and went kind of viral.
Well, you know, David Sedaris says that he divides his life up into before he read the Santaland Diaries on NPR and after. That just divided his life. And I suppose I can divide my life in a similar way with the writing of that poem. I went to graduate school in Kansas in the early 90s to become a better poet, but unlike many of my colleagues who wanted to go on and get PhDs and teach in college, I wanted to catch my students. I had to teach freshman composition while I was there, and I found that I loved teaching. So although I went to graduate school to become a better poet, I realized that what I really loved was teaching.
I have to pause there for 1 second because there probably aren't many people in the world who say, I went to graduate school to be a poet. I mean, that's a pretty small group to begin with, isn't it?
I don't know, because I am a poet, so I hang out with people who go to graduate school.
You know all 10 of them.
That's terrible that you would say that.
I'm sorry.
There are lots of,
I'm kidding.
Many of my friends, I have many more than 10 friends, and they have MFAs. So you're talking to the wrong person if you're trying to say that there are only a few of us.
No.
So I came out and became a teacher, and I was teaching for 9 years, and for a long time I was going to poetry slams. I don't know if you've ever been to a poetry slam. Going to poetry slams on the weekends, and luckily the poetry slam season is during the summer, so I had the summers off for the most part while teaching. And I went to this, it was in the poem I make it sound like it was a dinner party. If truth be told, and truth is not actually the most important thing in a poem, it was a New Year's Eve party.
Well, that counts. That's close enough. You're not stretching the truth that much.
It was the lawyer who made the comment, "Come on, Taylor, be honest. What do you make? Why did you become a teacher?" He was the host of the party. There were about 100 people there. What I don't say in the poem is that when the lawyer said, "Be honest, what do you make?" as a way of trying to show everybody there, anybody who would willingly choose to become a teacher must be so stupid they shouldn't be allowed to be one. What I don't say in the poem is that my real answer to him that night was $28,500. I didn't have the guts. Poetry is, for me, at one level, a way of rewriting the past to sort of...
Sure.
That's the way it should have been. It should have been. So,
but here's the question. Did you think that at the moment? Like what eventually became the poem? Or did you feel it? Did you feel it?
I was furious. I felt it. I didn't have the words for it.
Right.
And also, I cannot swear that he worded the question that way.
Fair enough.
What do you make? That is probably me as the poet the next week saying, how can I pretend he asked the question so that I can say, what do I make? I'll tell you what I make. I make a difference. I make children work harder than they. So I wrote the poem. I put it up on my brand new website, which in 1998, like a lot of websites had lots of pages that said "coming soon." You know,
yeah, with the little construction guy,
construction,
right? Yeah, the little yellow guy.
Flash animation, right doing that. And
no, it wasn't Flash. It was just a GIF.
Okay,
you were ahead of your time because now GIFs are back.
Okay. And it must have touched a nerve because people would would go to my website, and it's my own fault that the poem got separated from my name, because I had a link that said, click here to see an example of my work. And I didn't think I needed to say What Teachers Make by Taylor Mali and then have the poem, because you're on my website. But people would, I didn't realize then, this is 19 years ago.
Right.
That
This was pre-YouTube too.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That the audience for any website isn't, it can be other people.
Yeah.
There are other ripples.
People
So
will spread it.
I think teachers copied the poem, sent it around to their friends, and eventually
Probably
my
made every
name,
staff meeting in the United States.
I had 2 people come up to me today and
Really?
say, I never realized you were the person who wrote the original email. I'm like,
Oh, they
okay,
like
first of
reread
all,
it. Somebody reread it?
Oh, people have rewritten
Oh,
my
really?
poem and sent it, and it's become a inspirational cyber spam.
Got it.
But eventually, that poem is probably partly responsible for me in the year 2000 going to the principal of my school and saying, I'm going to take next year off just to see if I can make a living as a poet. And that was 17 years ago.
So how do you make a living as a poet these days? Because, I mean, I was kidding earlier. I wouldn't pretend to be a poet, but I love poetry. I've done, like everybody, had the high school journal with bad poetry in it. Like I've got, in spades, they'll read it at my funeral, and they'll all laugh at me.
What was your high school poetry journal called?
Oh, it was actually just a journal.
Oh, okay.
But
that journal. I see what you're
yeah,
saying.
like a larger journal. It was,
okay.
but I haven't got the guts yet to join what's the ones where everybody gets up and reads their bad stories and poetry from high school? Do you know these events? They're like poetry slams.
Is it like The Moth? But
yeah, I don't. I'll think of it. But
okay,
you get up and you read your journals from high school publicly.
I have a friend, Kristen O'Keefe Aptowitz, who every year would come to our poetry slam and bring up her journal, and you realize that since she was in 7th grade, she really hasn't changed one bit.
That's what I'm afraid of doing if I read my stuff.
Right.
But what I was going to say is obviously poetry is not something that we really celebrate maybe the way we should. It gets celebrated in pop culture through music and other things. But today, if my kid came to me and said, Dad, I'm going to be a poet, right? I'd be a little worried about how she's going to make a living, right? So how do you do this, Mr. Poet?
Well, I think if being a professional poet was what I were aiming to do, I never would have ended up here. This is only a profession that I could have fallen into having done something else. I was a teacher, and you know what? I say that both teaching and writing poetry are about being the midwife to a kind of epiphany. You're trying to draw forth these sudden bursts of new understanding. So to that extent, I've never stopped teaching. If you can, 9 years that I was in the classroom and the 17 years out, I'm on my 26th year of teaching, and I've already forgotten your question. How do I make a living? Well, it's not just writing poetry. Nobody pays you to write a poem.
Right.
Occasionally, if you get a poem published in the New Yorker, Kevin Young is the new poetry editor of the New Yorker. He just got announced yesterday as a friend of mine. Maybe now I'll be published in the New Yorker.
Great.
Finally. Paul Muldoon was fantastic, but he never published a poem of mine. I know the New Yorker pays, but you get paid by doing things like this. I'm speaking about teaching. I get invited to a lot of teaching conferences and writing conferences, and just small town arts councils. When there was still a National Endowment for the Arts.
We won't touch that right now.
Okay. The budget hasn't passed, but that just came down this morning, right, or yesterday. You piece it together wherever you can.
You connect it to other things, right, that are related.
Sure. So and you teach. I teach poetry.
Oh,
I'm often the visiting writer. What I do is I'm the perennial visiting writer who comes in for a day or a week to teach poetry writing workshops.
So speaking of that, we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the work that you are doing with kids still, and some of the ways that you're challenging them and get them to write creatively and interestingly. I'd love for you to tell some of those stories.
Well, one of my favorite assignments that I'm working with is based on a poem by Ted Kooser called Abandoned Farmhouse, where he walks around an abandoned farmhouse and tries to sort of piece together the clues of who lived there. I'm going to paraphrase the first lines. It goes, "He was a big man, say the size of the shoes on a pile of broken dishes by that front door. A tall man, too, says the length of the bed in an upstairs room. And a good, God-fearing man, says the Bible, with the broken back on the floor below the window, dusty with sun. But he was not a good farmer, say the boulders in the field." So it's looking around an area and letting the objects speak for you. And that is a tremendously powerful lesson for students to learn, that you can write a poem where just choose the objects and let the objects do the talking for you. So I gave this to a class I was teaching last spring in New York City, and I said, I want you to pick a dozen objects in your room and let the objects speak for you. You're writing in the third person. And this one kid came in and he said, "Oh, Mr. Mali, I don't think I want you to pass out my poem because I don't want you to workshop my poem because I think I might have said something inappropriate." I had an assistant. I'd already given the poems to my assistant and said, "I'm sorry, but it's AJ. He's the one who's going to choose it." AJ comes in and he goes, "Hey, let's call the guy David. David, we're definitely using your poem." And David goes, "Oh, no." The line that he was afraid of, the line that he was too terrified to hear his classmates, to have his classmates hear, was this: "The half-drunk bottle of whiskey in his lower desk drawer says that he is not the little boy his parents think he is." And the rest of the class went, "Oh my goodness." And the one kid said, "I didn't know we could write about things that were important." and that just, it was tremendously useful for kids to realize that sometimes what you are most afraid to commit to paper is what the world most needs to hear.
Yeah. And so that's a powerful exercise for the voice of a student, but also self-reflection, helping them connect with their peers in so many different ways.
Yeah, well, it's about, I guess revelation is the noun form of to reveal, but it's not what we think of. It's all about revelation.
Yeah.
That's a great word. I gotta, means something.
Well,
means
we have it recorded. We have it recorded for you.
I'll watch this later.
Yeah. So one other thing you mentioned just recently is you're working on a project called DICE, that you call DICE. Tell us more about that.
The metaphor dice.
Yeah.
This has been since April is National Poetry Month, and last April I first came up with these idea for dice, and it was just two-dimensional, like clip these out and tape them into dice and then roll them. Since a metaphor is really just an equation between two nouns, right? This equals that, with perhaps an adjective thrown in on the side. One of my favorite metaphors is Mary Oliver says, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to drag yourself through the desert on your hands and knees. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." Okay, that's a metaphor. The body is a soft animal. So I decided, well, what if I came up with dice? So one dice is just larger concepts. One dice is smaller objects. And the third dice is, the middle one, is just adjectives. So you take them and you roll them, and you get an instant metaphor. Some of them work, some of them don't work. Some of them need a little bit of coaxing. It can be a competitive game. If I roll, the mind is a small town prayer, You know, I can sit with my friends and they go, okay, here's why. The mind is a small town prayer because it only asks for what it needs. Good love, fresh air, fresh water. And somebody else goes, no, the mind is a small town prayer because the mind itself is a small town where everyone is praying and everywhere it is the same prayer. I didn't think of these off the top of my head. These are two things that my friends, I threw that metaphor out there and asked them to send me justifications. So the goal is sometime this fall, I'm going to start a Kickstarter campaign to create 20-sided dice made out of stress balls.
So geeky. I love it.
And they have to be, in order to be 20-sided.
Wait, out of stress balls?
Yeah, because in order to make a 20-sided die big enough so that each triangle, on a 20-sided icosahedron, each side is an equilateral triangle. Right. And in order to make it big enough so that the font is legible, it has to be at least 55 millimeters wide. If you made that out of dice, it feels like an angular, sharp golf ball. And I know better than to give those to a 7th grade class because they would fling them. So I thought, what can I make the dice out of so that they cannot be dangerous? And you can get these icosahedron stress balls.
Nice.
So that's what the project is going to be. Watch for it. Metaphor Dice.
That's awesome.
MetaphorDice.com.
Look for it on Kickstarter soon.
Right. And there is a website, metaphordice.com.
MetaphorDice.com. I have a feeling we could talk all day.
I bet we could.
I love what you're doing. I love that you're asking students to go deep and express themselves in new ways. And we're so excited that you were able to share this with the CUE community here at the conference. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Take care. For everybody here at the CUE conference, this is why you need to be here if you weren't here. I'm Chris Walsh, and we'll see you soon.